Alright, so we have put in our major beams here and our columns, and now we want to come in and put in our secondary structure, which goes right here. So we have these secondary joists, steel joists, wide flanges that go across this way, and we want to put those in. So we're going to use what's called a structural beam system to put those in. So the first ones I'm going to put in are going to be on the top roof level. So I'm going to double click on my roof, and you're going to see here the beams, right, that are going around the top. And we want to put the system in right in here. So under structure is beam system, and I'm going to left click on it. And the first thing I want to do is pick the beam type, which I want to pick the 130 by 28.1. And it's got a fixed number set up, and that's what we want. So you want to say fixed number, and you want to give it like an 11. And then when you hover over enclosed structural areas, it will start to lay those beams out. Now it's laying the beams out long ways, and we don't want them that way. We want them to go vertically. So you need to hover over the edge here and left click, and it will place those beams in there. And then you can hover over the left edge and left click, and hover over the left edge and left click. And now we have those beam systems. There's a lot of things that could perhaps be difficult with the beam systems. If you don't have an enclosed structural area, you cannot use the automatic beam. You might have to use the sketch beam, which will allow you to draw your own outline for that beam system. It could be justified incorrectly, but for right now, we've got ours in, and I'm just going to hit the big green check. And, oh, let's quit sketching. And it gave me that error message because I had gone to the sketch mode and had not sketched anything. But if we look in 3D, we have our beam systems in there. And so just to clarify, if I hover, you can pick the whole beam system, or you can pick a beam. So if you pick the beam system, you get a series of options on this side. If you pick the beam, so escape a couple of times, you get a different series of options over here. Okay, and a lot of the options for this beam right here are being controlled by the beam system, so you'll see that a lot of them are grayed out. So we need beam systems down on the bottom. We could go down to the level 2 and place them, but we can also just copy them. So I'm just going to select that beam system, hold down my control key, and select the other 2 beam systems. And I'm going to copy those to my clipboard up here. And then I'm going to go to paste, align to selected levels. And we want these to paste down to the top of beam level, because that's going to correspond with the top of that beam. So if I click top of beam, click OK, it's going to paste those beam systems in, and now those have been created right there. So one last thing I want to talk about is if I zoom in on the intersection of one of these beams with the girder, you see that it backs off to the web with a little spacing. You can actually adjust this, but you would have to do it for each beam in particular. So as we discussed in class, I would say use the beam system and the tools that Revit has as efficiently as you can. So if you're doing an overall structural framing plan, you can just leave it as is. But if you need to clean it up, or you absolutely have to have this right up next to that, what you would need to do after we had used the beam system is to pick this beam and unpin it from the system so we can have access to it. So if I unpin that, it will give me more access. Now, there is an option down here that says do not select pinned elements, and if it is selected, you won't be able to pick that pinned element. So you need to make sure that this select pinned elements does not have an X on it. I'm going to pick this, unpin it, and what that does is it gives me access to a blue dot, which is actually the structural component end, but it also gives me access to these little pull ends, which is just the end of the model. It's not a structural connection. And what I want to do is select it and pull this until I get the face of the web highlighted, which is that right there. And so I've pulled that into the face of the web. So now I have an overlapping condition, and I can cope this. So if you go to your modify, you can go to cope, and you can pick the thing to be cut and pick the thing to cut it with. And you'll see it'll cope it. It still has an offset right there. That coping offset is controlled right down here by this coping distance. And if you want that to be 0, you can set the coping distance to be 0. And now those things flush up. Unfortunately, you would have to do that for each one of these. So select your coping carefully. All right. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is go in and do some cross braces.